Morning, folks. Real pleasure to have Bob Ferrari back from Supply Chain Matters. He's going to be presenting on his annual survey on everything supply chain. And given what happened in 2020, this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So, Bob, thank you for joining us again. The floor is yours.
Yes, and good morning, Vin. It's a pleasure to be with you, and love to share with you what we call our 2021 predictions for industry and global supply chains. And basically what this is every year since our inception in 2008, we publish 10 predictions for the upcoming year. Our goal here is to advise clients, global-wide supply chain management, and IT support teams as to what to anticipate in the coming year. One of the differences we have in our predictions is that we don't just throw them out there to say, let's think about all these things and, see what sticks. We actually make this the agenda for our research, our blog topics, our podcasts, and our webinar themes during the year, because we believe that these are going to be the issues that a lot of teams will need to focus on in the coming year. And then for our readers, just to get a context here, and for our viewers, this is supply chain business, process, decision-making, technology, and IT, in the sense of integration of IT. And it's a wide swath right now because supply chain management has gotten much broader over the last 5 years, as you probably know. It now includes elements of product management, now directly under this umbrella. It includes customer service, more so than before, much deeper now into B2B and B2C online customer fulfillment and all of the activities and logistics and synchronization that goes with that, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So each year, the agenda gets broader, so to speak, as it were. So when we talk about, and when I summarize the themes for 2021, we look back a little bit about 2020 as you introduced this. And indeed, COVID-19 tested the resiliency, ingenuity, and resourcefulness of supply chain management teams, basically when it counted most. And then, despite all of the reports that we all heard in the media about empty store shelves or a critical shortage of supplies, yeah, there were some, but throughout the period, a lot of industry management teams really responded to what was presented to them. And in some cases, it was pretty severe. And we'll get into that a little bit. But overall, looking back, I think we're all giving the report card a really positive score for the ability of multi-industry supply chain teams to respond, and in most cases pivot to opportunities that they didn't even see that the pandemic would provide. And we'll get into a little bit of that.
Yeah, Bob, I ran a series last year called Acrobatics During the Crisis. And it's just amazing what supply chain teams did. You're absolutely right. So.
Yep, absolutely. And again, here, they face simultaneous and often parallel shocks related to both the demand side and the supply side, as well as logistics and transportation networks. Now, up to this point, when we encountered major supply chain disruptions, the 2008 global-wide recession, the tsunamis in 2011, the floods in Japan, the Fukushima earthquake, the one-dimensional in a sense of the shock might have been on the supply side, or it might have been somewhat on the demand side. Here, it was simultaneous. It was across the board. So when teams look to focus on one, then the other one presented, and then the third one presented. So it was continuous, very much continuous. So what all that means, and the theme for 2021, we call this a year of renewal, a theme of renewal. And it's manifested in our predictions, and we changed the whole format. We traditionally had a different format. And our format now is around a new thinking, new definition and new directions. And what is going to be often required now is described as the next normal of capabilities. And the next normal is essentially supply chain management teams accepting a reality that disruption is going to be their world. It's going to be a constant in this new world. So you have to now develop the capabilities to be able to deal with that and respond with that the best you can. So that's what that's all about. In terms of, we start our predictions, we do a summarization of economic and financial outlooks. Not that we created all the data, but we try to synthesize all of that data for the teams. So they don't have to go through all of that data. So basically what all the economists were saying going into this year, continued uncertainty, volatility, likely added disruptions. And look, here we are in the middle of February, and they're already present.
Yep.
Random virus flare-ups, we're seeing that. Some countries are into their second and third waves. The US is still struggling, although it's getting better. And supply disruptions.
Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, made a statement probably around July or August. And he said, is this a pandemic or an epidemic? He says, it started off as a health crisis, became a financial crisis. Then in the US became a diversity crisis. And then, of course, we've moved into a sustainability with all the crazy weather issues, right? So when you talk about disruption, there have been multiple shocks, as you call it.
Absolutely. And he's right on, absolutely. And then, from an economist perspective, again, depending on which economist you look at or whatever, most are anticipating that global output would return to some pre-pandemic levels in 2 to 3 years, okay? Now, that's very much industry dependent, all right? And that's the real message here. If you're in the high-tech consumer electronics area, it's going to come back faster because what happened with the pandemic? Everybody works from home. Kids go to school at home. The need for laptops explodes. The need for more cloud computing capability exploding. So you got that dimension. If you're in other industries, you got to look at this, from the perspective of what that means. So it's very much industry dependent, industry specific. And that's the way supply chain teams are going to have to look at this. China is one where, if you remember, China was the first one impacted back in early 2020. And then by March and April, they basically got it behind them. They bounced back and they haven't looked back since then. So a lot of global economists now are saying China is going to be one of the few nations that's going to be a standout here in terms of economic output and supply chain activity. That's going to be a conundrum as we look forward here, because
on the flip side, though, I think a number of companies are looking at China plus one or China plus two. People are diversifying away from China, so that's going to affect their ability to export. But you're right, they did bounce back much better than many Western economies have.
Right. So I mean, they're just grinding away right now, and I'll get into that in a minute as well to show you some of the effects of that.
Okay.
Geopolitical trade tensions certainly are remaining. They're not going to go away, at least not this year, maybe after this, but whatever. And that gets to this notion of movements and frictions related to regional trade alliances. And I brought that forward in our predictions because when you look at all of these, they're all acronyms, and maybe our audience doesn't know about them, but things like CPTPP and RCEP, those are new Asian alliances, trade alliances. And China now is getting much more active in the RCEP because they want to be the primary influence of that. So the Silk Road Initiative, in the sense of more influence on the more global economies, now they want to do that through trade alliances. And then USMCA was part of the Trump administration recasting, the North America Trade Alliance. That's going to get its test now in 2021. And then we've all been reading about the EU, Brexit, UK. Now we have the new trade alliance, and 2021 is probably going to be a rocky year here in that. But the reason I bring this up is because when you look at the futurists, when you hear some of the futurists talk about the 5-year window, and what are we going to see here? When they talk about supply chains now, they're talking about a dimension that calls for regionalization. So the notion of combating too much reliance on a particular region may fall back to these regions. So you look at Asia as a region, both for product demand and for supply. You look at North America, the broader region. You look at Europe, the continent of Europe, and it includes the UK and maybe others as well. That may well be where this is going. I mean, I think it has some viability here, but we're going to have to see. But for 2021, it's the frictions and the jockeying that's going to go on here to watch.
Oh, Bob, I mean, I did an interview yesterday on sustainability. I basically made the point. I said, the world is pretty hypocritical. Everyone expects the U.S. to run all kinds of massive deficits decade after decade. Why isn't Germany? Why isn't China? Why isn't Japan? Right? So it's gonna take some realignment in terms of expectations. The U.S. just cannot be a destination for everything. It's gotta be. Other countries have to open up a lot more.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk to senior supply chain leaders, and you look at all the survey data that's out there right now, the most significant challenges this year, they're described as what is called organizational mind share shifts. So from a supply chain perspective, it's more closely aligning the supply chain to business strategy. And what that means is prior to this, when we watched supply chain activity, it was kind of functionally driven. And even within the function, there were some islands of that. So you had a procurement strategy around how you wanted to deal with a global supply chain set of suppliers. You had supply chain operational strategies around logistics and distribution and how they needed to be aligned and how they had to be deployed. You had planning, sales and operations planning about how you're going to get the revenue budget performed. Now that alignment is much more going to be focused on what's the business strategy that we need to do over the next 2 years. What is involved in online versus other dimensions? What is involved in terms of resiliency and needs for agility? What does this new normal really mean in terms of disruption and change? What do we need to do to be prepared? So the supply chain leader is now really reaching out to the line of business side of this and saying, hey, we've got to align, folks. We got to get together, because we can certainly talk about supply chain agility and resiliency, but you need to understand what that means and what do we have to do to make this happen in our business.
The silo point is so Bob, you're so correct. I mean, when you look at what the Amazons and the Shopify's were able to do, and you look at how little they got from external vendors, makes a point of people who are dependent on external vendors, how siloed they ended up becoming, right? So they're planning tools, they have some demand forecasting tools, they have some revenue planning tools, but nothing is really integrated. And so I think it'll take the vendor community. This is going to shock the vendor community into thinking a lot more integrated than they have.
Absolutely, unequivocally. I'll get to that as well. And I think the other part of this is like, let's say you're an independent seller on Amazon right now. And, Amazon's doing an extraordinary job, not only in market share dominance online, but in providing you all of these services. Literally, they're becoming your logistics and transportation supplier as well. So that's the positive side of that. The not so positive side of that is they have total control over the data related to your customers. When do they buy? When should they buy? And in some cases, they have some knowledge of your products. And in some cases, we hear stories now, and I've had guests on my podcast that talk about, well, now they come up with their privatization of products, and they look so similar to the products you have. So this notion of mindshare shift says, all right, if we're really going to embrace omnichannel, do we want Amazon as that partner, or is Amazon Plus and to your Shopify, or to, for some of the bigger companies here, hey, do we need to go direct?
Sure.
Have our own channel. So there's going to be a lot of that.
Yep.
And then the new definitions, directions are basically what's implied by agility, resiliency, alignment, and orchestration of process and decision making, because some of these are mutually exclusive. We can be more agile, and maybe we can be more resilient, but something's got to give.
Right.
In a business process dimension, and maybe even in a technology investment decision. So that's going to be there. Now, three of the most obvious areas that are going to get attention, and the numbers here are our predictions. We number them 1 through 10. The first prediction, enhanced end-to-end visibility, continuous supply network risk mitigation, absolutely, unequivocally, is top of mind on every supply chain management agenda right now. What we mean by that, end-to-end visibility, is all of the tiers of the supply chain. Most organizations right now have really good visibility to their tier 1 suppliers, their primary suppliers. And that's generally the way it's been going. But when things begin to happen in these big disruptions, especially COVID, now the shortages, the disruptions that are happening in tier 2, tier 3, and even tier 4, that's the ones that deep six the whole effort at that point. So end to end now is they want that visibility. The only way they can get it is through cloud platforms. The ability to share all of that information in the cloud, across the supplier base. That's going to have an implication this year in where those cloud vendors go. The other notion of supply network risk mitigation is on the procurement side and the strategic sourcing side, where procurement teams go out and find suppliers or continue to manage suppliers, and the notion of how they manage risk. Now, risk can be defined as financial viability, capability, of their own systems, capability of their own products and their own innovation. Up to now, this has been an island of information to itself. The procurement people had their procurement apps and their supply network risk mitigation apps on their side. Supply chain operations, supply chain planning, sales and operations planning had theirs on their side. What I'm saying in this prediction now is you got to bring them together, folks. You can't have the two of them without integrating them, because the information is critical to both. So I think we're going to see some movement there. Prediction 2 is the discernible acceleration of digital transformation. The difference is it's now line of business driven. In 2020, supply chain teams had no choice. They had to go to digital transformation the only way they could. Basically, it was anything they could get their hands on in terms of, people working from home, in terms of turning their applications into cloud-based systems, all of that. Now the focus turns to what do we need to do from a line of business perspective on digital transformation capabilities, all right? Broader, more holistic. And then number 4, we just touched upon omnichannel and what that needs to be and how it's now essential to business growth. So now you got to make some tough decisions around what's going to be the strategy here going forward? Are we going to have one provider? Are we going to do it ourselves? Are we going to go omni-channel? So be a direct ship conduit to somebody else. And if we're going to do all those things, it implies a lot of other things that we need to get done from a business process and technology perspective. Now, I wanted to quickly share this with our audience here, because sometimes we lose focus to this, particularly if you don't watch supply chain. One of the indices of global supply chain activity is what we call the PMI reports, Production Material Index reports. There was one global index called the JP Morgan Global Manufacturing Composite PMI. This is a chart from 2014 through January, end of January. Look at the V-shaped response.
Yep. Yep.
It began in March, right?
Yep.
This is how supply chain, multi-industry supply chains responded to what was going on. It was amazing, all right? And they did everything in their power to get material back to where it needed to be.
You know, the cloud vendor Plex, they showed me this on their customer database summarization.
Right.
And it was like you should. I think theirs was a little more, not as pronounced a V, but definitely a quick rebound. So yeah.
Right. So just a couple of things I want to point out here. Look at the bending of the curve that now has started. Okay. And when I wrote about this on Supply Chain Matters, what the data suggests now are a couple of things. First, all of that material that you see there is now clogging all of the ports. So on the West Coast, there's a queue of about 80 to 100 ships, container ships, anchored off the coast, trying to get into the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach.
Yep. Yep.
The other part of this is the industry, the container industry, has gotten very sophisticated now on the use of technology to manage capacity. So what happened during this whole period is we had unprecedented amount of what they call blank sailings. Blank sailings is a canceled voyage. So the container lines were saying, you know, if I can't get 60, 70% load on this ship, I'm not going to sail it. I'll just wait for the next window.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened as a result of that, at the end of the year, the global wide container index for, let's say, voyages from Asia to the US West Coast increased 137%. It cost $1,800 a container to do that. Extraordinary. That was something nobody planned for,
right,
in terms of cost impact. So that's what we're seeing right now. And that leads to the next part of our predictions here. Prediction 3, augmented resiliency and global supply network sourcing. It's far more important now. It's going to get attention. As you described, Vinnie, this is the China plus one strategy. As we're talking today, the news cycles in the US now are reporting on President Biden's new supply chain initiative, his executive directive. They're going to look at 4 strategic industries in terms of policy. And they include pharmaceuticals, including APIs, including medical PPE and all of that. Semiconductors, all in the news right now. Auto industry disruptions for semiconductors, others as well. And the decoupling of China from a semiconductor. Large-scale batteries is on that list. Minerals, critical minerals like rare earths and all that. So resiliency now is going to take an industry dimension and it's going to take a government dimension. And by the way, it's not just the US. I've seen reports that Europe is doing the same thing right now. Okay, so they're looking at that. So now supply chain teams have got to look at augmented resiliency.
Yeah, I mean, around the world, PPE was a huge issue from China. Testing, depending on their reagents, became an issue. So, yeah, I mean, everyone suffered last year. So everybody's reevaluating that +1 or +2 strategy.
Right. Now, prediction 6 calls for added priority of connected manufacturing and supply chain operational synchronization. What that means is that if a lot of companies now are going to look at nearshoring over the next couple of years, the way to get around that is they've got to automate manufacturing and supply chain execution, much so than before. And it's not only automation, it's synchronization of the activities. The end-to-end visibility meeting the automation that I mentioned before. From a technology perspective, what are we seeing here? Tremendous amounts of money, investment money, coming into the logistics space. Project 44, all of these startups that are doing logistics type visibility, end-to-end visibility. That's going to continue. We're seeing now a lot of emphasis now on connected manufacturing to overall logistics distribution. And before, these were stovepipes. So the notion was that you had manufacturing systems that planned all of the manufacturing to the dock door. And once it reached the dock door, hey, supply chain, hey, logistics and transportation, it's your baby now.
Right.
Now the realization is, can't do that anymore. What we got to do now is we got to have visibility as a flow from that manufacturing dock right through to where we want to put it with the customer's receipt. It's one continuous visibility and synchronization. And now we're getting technology startups and even some of the current technology providers starting to look at this. And we're seeing new introductions here. Prediction 9 is an implication of what all this is involved here. And what this means is that these increased global transportation costs and very much eroding service levels are going to foster some new thinking in business strategy. Here's an example. If it's costing you $5,000 to ship a container from Asia to the US West Coast, and the value of the goods in that container and the margin that you get from that don't align, you've already lost money. You're already dead in the water at that point. That's going to force some tough decision making for some of those lower margin products. Now, there's going to be some push-pull here. The global container lines are saying, oh, don't worry about this. It's going to settle out in the second part of the year. You won't see these types of rates. I don't know about that. I think.
Yeah, and the same thing between rail and truck. Rail prices have gone up quite a bit. So, yeah, I mean, like you say, everything hit the supply chain last year. All kinds of financial and you haven't mentioned sustainability. Increasingly, that's going to be.
Yeah, but we've got that too. I didn't mention it, but that's prediction 10 for us. Absolutely. And that's the coming to what I see is sustainability and corporate social responsibility definitely coming together here. And this is a big deal in supply chain because supply chain was always about seeking lowest cost.
Right.
And lowest cost always equated to some messy stuff around how you got cheap labor, and that's getting more visible.
I don't know if what you're seeing, but right now I'm seeing everyone just pushing it down the supply chain saying, certify that you're going to meet my sustainability goals.
Right.
That won't last too long. People have to become a lot more involved, like you say, in visibility and certification and so on.
Yeah. And then finally, for our audience, Vinnie, because this is an analyst lens, prediction 8 is my belief that we're going to see much more active investment, exit, M&A activity among sectors of supply chain tech landscape. This is a hot area. It started in 2020, and now these vendors are catching on to SPACs, which are ways to go public on the New York Stock Exchange. We had one big transaction, cloud platform provider E2Open got involved with a SPAC with Nürnberger. That was announced in December. That was a $1.4 billion deal for them to go public, so to speak. I think we're going to see more of those. The New York Stock Exchange has a new strategy now that allows IPOs to consummate with less of the expense. That's going to be an opportunity here.
Palantir used a different kind of listing, like you say, SPACs. A lot of EV companies are using SPACs. So
right,
yeah.
As
you always got to be a little careful about creative financing, but it's certainly happening.
Yeah, absolutely, unequivocally. But you're going to see hot tech sectors here. This is where the aggregation, I think, is going to come. This is where you're going to watch it, right? So the logistics technology providers are real hot right now. A lot of money, hundreds of millions going into this area right now. Another new area that came out at the latter part of 2002, Copra Software, which is primarily in procurement, goes out and acquires LlamaSoft, which is a supply chain analytics vendor. $1.5 billion, basically takeover. And the interesting part about that, their value proposition here is they want to bring, as I mentioned before, the procurement information together with the supply chain analytics and planning information.
Yeah.
So this may be a forerunner of something to come. We're going to have to watch this to see there. So there's notions of that going on here as well. And then, already, I just getting ready for this morning, the Wall Street Journal has another one. Berkshire Grey Robotics just consummated a SPAC. They're getting $410 million, basically to go public here. They're New England based, MIT roots. Here we go, warehouse automation, same thing. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and it's going to be an area to watch here, particularly where the big players go here. And I'm telling people that I kind of think we're going to see a couple of big ones here. Here's how our viewers can get a copy. Just go to our website, ferrarigroup.com/supply-chain-matters/research center. The report is complimentary. Just put in your information, download it, and enjoy it.
Bob, this is great.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for taking the time. Come back anytime. Come back with a periodic update on what you're seeing, because it is a dynamic market.
Right. And I look forward to having you on our podcast.
Absolutely, Bob. Thank you.